Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and speak with the innovators leading the charge. Today's guest is Leon Gobens, CEO and co-founder of Teqplay, founded in 2015 in Rotterdam by Leon and Richard van Klaveren. Teqplay uses digital twin technology to make maritime data actionable, improve port call efficiency, and drive more sustainable and collaborative shipping operations. This is kind of a cool and special episode. Leon is not just a guest, he's also a co-host for today's conversation. This discussion will be featured on both The Last Dinosaur and his Vodcast, Driving Change in Maritime with Teqplay. So we open it up, give it space on both sides of the table. Leon, welcome.
Thanks, Chris. And to complete the introduction, welcome to this special edition of Driving Change in Maritime. It's a co-production with The Last Dinosaur. And my guest today will be Chris Aversano, the producer of The Last Dinosaur and the partnership lead at Wood Mackenzie. I'm curious to learn more about his tagline, connecting people with products in the maritime shipping industry. And as already mentioned by Chris, we will be both guest and host in one. So I'm looking forward to this special edition.
This is going to be kind of cool. I think, and maybe you as well, Leon, when you read things about hosting podcasts or vodcasts, it was like have other guests on and try out new things. So here we are. I think a great place to start with you is a little bit through your background and kind of, what was the impetus behind Teqplay to say, hey, we're going to make things change?
I always like this question on how did you get where you are, because it's also a very way back in memory lane. But I think if you look at my career, there are three words which are really have been driving me, which is innovation, it's technology, and it's collaboration. Those three words, that is what I'm very passionate about. Looking back, that is what I have been doing in the industry, what I have been doing in my whole career. And back in 2013, 14, I had the opportunity to switch scenery, and I thought, I've never done anything in maritime and living in Rotterdam. Is there not something that I can do? That I stay close to home, yet be connected to this whole big world and have the opportunity to? So I immersed into the industry and on board with the pilots, the tugs, the authorities and vessel terminals, join the agents on all kinds of visits, just to figure out how is this industry working, right? From the outside, you don't see it, but once you get into it, you really get a feel. And then for me, that was really the trigger. Okay, I feel like I can add and bring something to the table over here with my background in technology and collaboration. Because if you look at that port, it's all about collaboration. Up to 28 stakeholders is huge. That is happening in one port call. What needs to be orchestrated? So for me, that was kind of the sweet spot. Yeah, that triggered me in stepping into the maritime space. And actually to start Teqplay in that sense.
That's really interesting. I think what you brought up there, I don't think I've ever heard before, but it sounds like you've done a deep dive, is having 28 stakeholders or people involved in every port call, because I think that just goes to show the scope and scale of what happens when a ship comes into port, because people, whether living in Rotterdam or Singapore, or if you're driving down the I-95 corridor across the highway from Newark Airport, is the seaport there. And it looks like a little bit like orchestrated chaos, but it is orchestrated chaos with 28 different folks. One of the things that you talk about is digital twinning. I love to hear kind of your take on that and why you think maybe that's a little bit better than some of the ideas around reporting.
Yeah. Maybe the digital twin, I think that's a technology part which is playing up in me, right? That is bringing together a lot of data. I think on the journey that I made, there was one other thing that triggered me next to the scale and the magnitude of ports and ships sailing in. It was also, there is a lot of data available. I ran into AAS. I've also been very active in the open data movement, ensure that as much data gets shared as possible. And I thought, come on, this is real-time data of all vessels worldwide that you are able to collect. You must be able to get such a deep insights out of that. For me, that was actually the start of the journey. There is technology, of course, but there is also data that you can play with it, and the data you can make use for the people in the port. So for me, that was actually connecting the dots to bring that together. And that is what has become the digital twin. So now we are ingesting many different feeds of data. So what we to pick up is like the AES, but of course also how does a port look like? because it's nice to have it all on the map, but you need to understand what is happening in this port. Is this vessel at berth? Is the pilot going on board? Is there a tug alongside? Bunker operations going on? It's not about where is the vessel. It are these type of questions. Where is the vessel in the process? Who is involved? That are the things that people want to know. So that is where the digital twin kind of analogy started. Bringing in the data of the port, bringing in sea and weather information, bringing in all notices that are being given by port authorities, terminal planning, port planning, all that data. If you bring that together, you get a really decent picture of current state of the port. And what are all the actors at that point in doing? You are able to make predictions on what is going to happen in the future. Vessel will arrive, the famous ETA. Vessel will leave berth, ETD. And these are all the data elements. These are all the questions, actually, a lot of the people working within this 28 stakeholders working in port are asking continuously. When do I need to do something? When is it happening?
And when can I get bunkers? When can I get stores? When's the ship going to shift? When do I need line handlers? Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't happen by accident. Kind of one kind of quick question, and then a little bit about how you start Vodcast. When you kind of got into the industry over a decade ago and kind of pivoted towards this, is there anything that jumped out and surprised you that was kind of interesting that, you said, wow, I didn't expect that? Or maybe it wasn't a surprise. Maybe it was a challenge, because tongue in cheek, this is the last dinosaur. Everybody talks about automation. I was the last 2 weeks of kind of things that I've done, a lot of talk about automation, but a lot of pushback on that automation, especially when it comes to, hey, you're replacing humans. How do you do this kind of in an effective, not only effective, efficient way, but a way without just making thousands of people out of work? But that's not what we're talking about. But is there something of a surprise that came up when you started talking to ports and other folks who probably have this in the back of their mind?
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out was there is a lot of information exchange, right? I was talking about the operational process, where's the vessel, etc., but also about the cargo that is on board, on the crew that is on board, all these kind of things. And what I noticed was this is just plain paperwork. It's the pen and the paper. It's the planning. It's all these processes that you need to have or need to know. It was manual. There was so little digitization. Looking at the environment, you might guess why it is. It's a rough environment. A lot of things are happening. Things get a breakdown, and the pencil and paper always work. But then again, if you look at the amount of investment, that was the part that jumped out to me. It's this is so much money. If you are waiting for 1 hour, come on, this is losing big bucks. This is really this is really about something. So that disconnect really, that was what triggered me. Okay, this is value. It is clear that you can improve over here.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, you have up to 3 hours or with tankers for waiting documents at the berth after, load or discharge. 3 hours, Now you're looking at demurrages being as high as they are. I don't know what they are today, but the big news recently was, tankers hitting over $100,000 a day on VLs. So demurrage doesn't trade in that, but let's say it's even $80,000 or $60,000. Yeah. You're waiting, 3 hours. That's a lot. Yeah, it's not a ton of money, but it's the owner's not making money. The charterer isn't really doing anything with the ship. And I'm sure that this repeats itself, whether it's tankers, whether it's, Rotterdam, obviously with the container and other markets as well, all the markets. So to me, I think that's, it should be, you're done. We could get you the paperwork. And by the way, it's verified as you're taking the pilot. There's no reason to hang out in Beaumont, Texas, which is where I did a lot of my training. There's no reason to do that.
The sentence that stood out to me when I started off was there was this kind of saying in the port of Rotterdam that ships were dropping out of the air, which to me is come on. But what was meant there would be a ship would be arriving at the terminal and no one was kind of expecting it.
Yeah.
And that's unbelievable, right? In this age where everything is connected, there is a lot of visibility. You can know it. And then still, with this amount of money involved, a ship dropping out of the air. Come on. There's definitely a space I want to.
Yeah, I definitely have heard that with another port. I don't want to say who, but I was having a recent conversation from another European port, and this was an issue that they struggled with. And it sounds like for now at this point, they have it squared away. But for a while, it was, we would get a ship at arrival and we didn't have it on a schedule. It sounded like there was a paper or maybe a manually inputted schedule. We didn't have it on the schedule. We didn't have it on the dock. We didn't know where they were going, and they showed up here. And obviously this was about 10 plus years ago, but still, it wasn't like this was in the 80s or 90s. This was 10 years ago. So you had AIS, you had a level of digital capacity, and that's really, I think why people are focusing on it. And finally, why did you pivot with your company to a vodcast? I think it's interesting. I think digital video first is kind of cool. It's something that I've kind of backed into a little bit. I went more with the audio, but tell us a little bit about that background and the reason and kind of how you've done that.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it a pivot. I think for me, it's kind of the importance of sharing what is really happening in a port call. I think there is so limited awareness with a lot of people on the complexity of what is happening. And the podcast is a perfect medium for that. So also, if you look at the audience, the pilots have been there, the techs have been there, towage companies, the port authority have been there, terminals. Everyone has been saying their part of the story and sharing their part of the story. And I think that is what is actually needed if you want to improve or bring a next level of collaboration or efficiency into ports, is that you also do have an understanding of actually what is happening. And actually one of our customers, Shell, they actually said, I asked them, why did you select us to build a solution for bunkering? And they said, like, well, you know so many of the angles of the shipping industry which typically wouldn't be brought into part of the discussion, but they are really relevant in making a digital product, in solving a problem on efficiency, creating a digital tool that is doing that. For me, it's the thought leadership, maybe the expensive word, but it's about sharing and bringing back this knowledge, this passion about what is happening in ports, on this magnificent level of collaboration that is happening. For me, that is my passion, that is my drive. But let me turn the table then, Chris, and you started a maritime podcast. So what were the drivers for you to move into that space?
Yeah, so I think it was very similar to yours. I think it was very similar to yours in the sense of, a little bit about thought leadership, a little bit about the passion side, but I'll tell you kind of my thinking about it. I was thinking about it. I pivoted away from the commercial side of the business. I kind of ran that course. The people that do broking and chartering, you have to be uber focused. And I had a broader kind of view of the market. If you would talk to a broker about maybe a future regulation, they don't really care because it doesn't impact, unless they're building ships, it doesn't impact the here and now. Between that and a few other things, I was ready to move on. So I kind of got into the technology side of the business with the role with Q88, which I was very grateful for because it played on my experience as a broker, because we had a product that we sold to ship brokers, but it was in product management. So a whole different discipline. And during that time, I started thinking, I should do a podcast. I should do a podcast. Maybe do one with Q88. And that didn't really resonate. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it on myself. And I told my family, and I was kind of going on about it for at least a year. And, not only that, but it was COVID and I'm fairly social. I like to be out and about. And I was like, I want to do a podcast. So finally they said, look, buddy, this is my wife, but the kids, shut up, do a podcast. We never want to hear about it. So I said, all right. So I got the equipment, and then I started to think of, all right, well, what am I going to focus on, right? And there's a lot of great podcasts out there, especially on the independent side. Lena Gottberg, she is the OG in our space. Sal Mercogliano, who has kind of had a real small kind of YouTube channel, and it took off around the time they had the incident in the Suez Canal with the Ever Given. And I saw all these kind of great ones and kind of watching it grow. And like I said, I really was interested in the digital side, interested in the podcast, and noticed nobody was doing just digitalization. And I thought, like, okay, let me try just focusing on the digital side, on the challenges, on the successes, talking to, founders and users, and maybe get some ship owners and things like that. And really to be a thought leadership part and a little bit of an ownership part. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not creative. And I'm like, oh, this may be a kind of a cool way to explore those sort of things. And that's how I came up with it. But I really wanted to focus on the digitalization of maritime, and hence the tongue in cheek. And what has happened is it's actually kind of expanded, not just digitalization, but social media, impact in shipping, and trying to get new people in the industry, as well as things like making more awareness on some of the stuff that in shipping there was a lot of blind eye being turned to in terms of harassment and other things. So really kind of bringing that to the forefront a little bit. I had some great discussions about that. And connectivity and seafarers, which was something I didn't really talk about or think about in the beginning, but I've had a lot of great conversations on those. So really it's the digital side, but not just the bits and bytes of we're going to drop this new product and this feature is going to save the world, but really all encompassing. And that's kind of how it evolved. And it's been pretty interesting, because what you don't realize, I think, well, what you may not realize, and I think you do, Leon, is that there's a lot of stakeholders and stakeholders in the industry that get lost if you're just fixing a ship, or get lost if you're booking a pilot. There's all these other folks who rely on either the data, the ship, the cargo, the job, or what have you. So, the digital side kind of brings a lot of that together.
Yeah. And now you have done more than over 100 episodes, 130, something like that. Are there patterns that you are seeing with all those conversations that you did have?
Yeah, that's a I think there's a pattern of people wanting to make the industry better. And I think that that's a true pattern. I have had on some folks who have decarbonization tools that rely on digital. The information that they produce, you can see how effective they are. I'm thinking of the wind sail folks. You say, okay, well, that's decarbonization. Yeah, but there's a digital aspect. They talk about digital twinnings. Obviously, anytime you talk about the seafarers, you're talking about you want to try to make a significant improvement to their health, well-being, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's shoreside, whether it's happiness on board the ship. So I think that is the general pattern, is how to improve an industry that is generally resistant to change, right? And I think that is one of the biggest things is how do we improve that? Whether it's like when you talk about port calls and making the tug operator and the bunker operator, they kind of know that what's going on, but really connected, or it's a seafarer that trying to figure out a good policy to with respect to things like Starlink. Do you limit it? And the challenge recently has been, do you limit connectivity to your desk worker? Do you take their phone away when they're sitting at the office for 8 hours?
Yeah.
So it gets into some interesting, and then everything in between, between AI and those sort of things, and the impact of the industry. So I think there's a lot there for sure.
I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. I like them, but one of the questions I always have, are there things that you feel that are not being discussed? I think that should be talked about, but people are kind of reluctant to.
That's a good question. I'm not sure if people aren't discussing things. I think that they do. I think that some of it around AI, I think it's still a big black box, and I think people feel confident about AI, but how much do they really know? I mean, I'm myself included, I use it for a real narrow band of things. So I think that a little bit of how much do we know, how much do we think we know about AI is one. And two is, in some areas we don't discuss, will there be consolidation? And I'll call it right now is, if you look at the hard wind sails, right? And again, this is more decarbonization, digitalization. But if you look at the hard wind sails, there's several manufacturers. There's a finite number of ships, and there's a finite number of ships that'll put them on there. At some point, the discussion will be and nobody's really talking about it, is when will there be consolidation? And I think that goes through some digital tools. There's going to be some consolidation, and we're seeing that already. But I don't think a lot of folks, with the exception of, do a year-end wash up with Evan, with the exception of that, the founders and other folks don't really talk about that. I think that's something that we're going to see a lot of. And it could be that, a big private equity firm comes in, and I wouldn't be surprised at all, and buys a couple of big companies, what we perceive, and puts it into one kind of monolith. And I'm very curious to see how that'll impact, if any, on the shipping industry.
Yeah. That's interesting to see, like, especially in the one-on-one discussions, I see this point of merging and that it needs to converge, that it needs to consolidate. I think there are a lot of companies who are seeing it. Also, is in the ship owning space,
Yeah.
with all the regulations and all the things in place, you cannot manage to have one ship. There's so much you need to know of so many things. The math doesn't work anymore in that area. So I do see, and the digitization holds the same, right? It looks like is cheap, but it's also, as I know, by running a company, it's hard work to get a tool that is actually supporting a process, that is supporting the user, that is really solving the problem.
Right.
Especially if you talk about port calls and terminals, where every port, every vessel is different, and every terminal. So yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be resolved. And AI, I'm really curious on how that is going to play out. If that helps to break this hurdle in one or the other way. You called your podcast the Last Dinosaur. Implies something like moving fast or moving slow. Any observations on the speed of change? Is it? Do we see it? Don't we see it?
Yeah,
What is your
I'll tell you a story about how I got surprised a couple of years ago in my old role. And I think it's moving. I think the a little bit of the problem that we suffer from is that you see movement with the big companies, Maersk, right? I'm not talking about Maersk tankers, although they're big in the tanker space. If you look at them as a ship owner, when you compare them to AP Moller Maersk, when you compare them to CMA, CGM, you compare them now to Zim and it was Hapag Lloyd getting together. Those are several hundred ships, right? You're talking about that they own and then control. It's a fairly large operation. I think what happens is you look at that and you see what they're doing, those companies, and investing in digital or decarbonization sometimes, but both platforms and what have you. But most ship owners average 5 ships as what they own, right? So that's an interesting, how do those companies do it? And other people who service those companies. But I think it's actually starting to move a little bit faster than what we see, right? Or what we're used to seeing, where the big guys will drag along everybody else. And I'll give you this, go back to the story. When I was at Q88, we had an API for the product I worked on. And it was really to take the data that people entered in and to push it out via an API call out to a system that they have, okay? So it was like kind of an outbound data push. We got a call from a mid-sized shipbroker in Europe. Hey, we built our own system to scrape the data that we're getting from emails, and we want an API to your system so we don't have to double enter the positions. And you had to pick me up off the floor. And it wasn't, and I, I'm not going to name the company. I'm not trying to be insulting to the company, but I just wasn't expecting a mid-sized shipbroker, not a Clarkson's, not an SSY, not one of these guys that have 50 offices all over. Although this company does a little more than shipbroking, so I'll to turn around and to say, we built something on our own that we think is better than what's on the market. And now we want an API. And we were like, well, we have an outbound API, so we could repurpose it for like an inbound. I know that's not the exact parlance, but I was like, we could repurpose this. This is not that hard to do. And we did it. And it was successful. And the broker was happy and we were happy because it acted like a POC of something that we never really thought about. And it's an interesting dynamic. So I think there's a lot of little things happening like that where you're getting, and what happened is ownership had somebody that they were able to trust to build out IT things like this. And I think that's what's happening all over, that you're hiring younger people or people who have the skill sets to build platforms internally quickly and relatively cheaply that could be layered with off-the-shelf things, whether it's what Teqplay does, whether it's with what Q88 used to do. And I think that to me is a real signal on the speed. But then that's to me like the heritage companies that are in this space. Like I said, the aforementioned Vessons or even Signal, that's pretty advanced. And of course, from the technology point of view, it adds to stickiness. So I think it's moving in slow ways. It's moving a little quicker than what people are used to. I mean, it's not like this hyper thing, but it is definitely moving. And then what happens is companies start to figure out that other companies are doing, and it becomes FOMO, right? And then the other piece is companies are realizing, especially ones that have been, you always want to squeeze, which are brokers and agents, no matter the commodity. They're realizing they got a lot of data. And it goes back in some cases to the beginning of their companies, which means you can do a lot with it. And I think that those companies will start waking up and saying, hey, we have this, we could issue reports, we could build algorithms, we could do a lot of things. And it won't bust down their budgets.
No, and I think that links also very neatly where I do see also a lot of change. Like we have built this digital twin on what is happening in port. So we are creating visibility independent of having any connection to any system because it's in the open. It's all right out in the air. The terminal, the planning, the AES, how a port looks like, all this kind of data, you can know it. And once you have that, you actually get deeper insights on things that people do not take for granted. And I think one of the funny examples when we started, one of the things we produce is an automatic statement of facts in ESOF, we call it. So there are all the timestamps that are happening on the water side of the vessel operations. That means like pilot going on board, truck alongside, bunkers being delivered, passing certain passage points, being on anchorage, all these kind of things. So we show this to an agent, and he said, "Yeah, you're not allowed to know this." And I said, "Well, sorry, we have derived it," but he was actually insisting and said, "I want you to delete it because this is our knowledge. It's proprietary. You're not supposed to know it. And what if my competitor can know it?" And that. I think this will also change the industry. Like this information becoming available as a foundation to know whether you're doing good or not. I think this transparency will drive the industry also to new levels.
Is that one of the things that you see as a big hurdle? Is that kind of resistance to transparency? Because you do deal with a lot of different stakeholders. In my roles, typically I deal with one or two of the stakeholders, but you have a broader view. Do you see a lot of that resistance? Instead of our generation, which we had to learn technology, right? We started off with rotary phones and telexes and now have a smartphone in our pocket. And I think our generation is generally open to that, but we now have the younger guys who were born on this and will be born into a more open kind of technology wise. How is that experience there? Because like you said, the agent going, wait a minute, this is my data. Well, is it like, no, we're just putting it together in a
Yes, there is reluctance to share data, and there will always be, especially on cargo and trade positions, these kind of things. There will be a reluctance to share because you're making money because you know something someone else doesn't know. So sharing is tricky, right? However, on operational processes, I think people are starting to realize more and more. Like, it might be inconvenient at this point in time, but effectively it is helping me. It is creating a process that becomes more predictable, which we can run more efficiently. So in the end, I can make more money. So the answer is a bit of both. There will always be reluctance, also because people can derive, but also people started to realize you can try to hide a lot, but like the AI, if the data is available and the internet has been scraped, ask a question about Chris Aversano, who he is, and you will get a lot of knowledge which would have taken ages.
Yeah.
So hiding has become so extremely difficult in this space. If you want to win, I think you need to realize that you're visible, and you need to leverage your strengths, which is actually being able to deal with how can you do things smarter.
I have that same conversation, and I think that on the commercial side as well as the agency side, I think that everybody's starting to realize that, hey, look, this is just, you can't stop the momentum. So that it does come down to, in addition to doing your job well and to having that knowledge without having to ask AI and being able to handle different situations, it's also, still a relationship business no matter how you boil it, right? And I think that that's not going to go anywhere. I think there's also a protective level, like, I want to have somebody else's eyeballs looking at this statement of fact, right? Like, because, okay, great, AI produced it, and it may be right 98% of the time, but that 2% could be a doozy when you're arguing a post fixture, right? That could be a real headache where somebody loses money or what have you. So, yeah, I think it's
Keeping in on thoughts, Chris. I think one of the fun facts that we find out is actually that if you do have the right algorithms in place, we are way more deterministic than people are who are filling in data points and timestamps. Things might be off, and we see it over and over again. The vessel left, No, the vessel remained for 3 more hours alongside. It was reported to depart,
Yeah.
and these kind of things at the terminal. Well, the guy is on his bike, reporting back an hour later, like what was the time that
Yeah.
the last line was. Short. Well, I can guarantee you that one was way off. So
Yeah.
that's also very funny to see. Like, yes, but then you can use it as a power to validate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that that's one of the things that the industry has a lot of, and that's the silos, right? We have a lot of silos, whether it's between kind of the company types, agencies, pilots, tugs, owners, or even within companies, technical managers, operations, chartering, finance. It's all about silos. And I think that, especially internally, that's where data transparency could be actually probably used a little bit almost easier if people just let their guard down and not say, well, this is mine. And I dealt with that with one company I worked with where the tech managers and the operations, they wanted nothing to do with chartering. And I just never understood it wearing the chartering hat. I didn't understand it. It was siloing. I never understood why. Whereas having a little bit of information about, ooh, that ship could be a little delayed, keep an eye on it, or it may actually be delayed into a better position or come ahead or what have you, or just learning. I don't have a tech background. So that's how you replace a generator and it takes, that long to do it. Cool. Cause then next time I hear it, I don't have to ask how long will we be in port. I'll know from basic experience. So I think that that's definitely one of the hurdles in the industry is not only this external sharing, but internal within departments, especially in companies as well. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
I think it's about breaking boundaries or building bridges, whichever metaphor you would like to use. But I think it's to connect the data and bring in the data that is actually influencing operations decisions together. And people can be a bit stubborn and be on an island and think this is the world. But yeah, eventually, if it becomes that visible and that transparent, I think people are also smart enough to actually say like, well, I cannot unsee this, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
want to see
yeah,
it,
yeah,
you
yeah.
cannot unsee it, and then there will always be someone in the company say like, okay, let's get this done.
Yeah.
I'm positive about change happening. There might be forces of resistance we do not see yet, but eventually it will move. No doubt. Too expensive.
And speaking of movement, looking at kind of as we enter where we are in our career, you hear a lot about a shortage of seafarers, but I also think there's going to be a shortage of people ashore to do all these different things because it's not like when I came ashore where okay, you sailed, you could do operations, you could do chartering, maybe you do marine insurance. And it was kind of like a few boxes that you checked and you picked one and you did that box, right? So now we have so many different things. Again, whether it's digitalization, decarbonization, whether it's workflow, anything like this. How are we as an industry going to attract and retain more talent to get them excited about maritime? And I think I'm a little envious. You're there in Rotterdam and you took the pivot just because it was surrounds you so much. In the United States, and many other countries, it's a relatively abstract concept, even with the emphasis. And I've been in the industry for over 30 years that the recent, and again, I'm wearing my American centric goggles here, administration has on shipbuilding, merchant marine, all this other stuff, which long overdue, great. But let's see what happens. But it's bringing attention to something that for 3 decades plus 4 decades, really, since the Reagan administration stopped the subsidies for the Jones Act, that shipbuilding in the United States and maritime has gotten any sort of kudos from anyone. So it's I look at it from that lens, but what do you think it's going to take a lot more than a couple of press releases in the US to get to attract and retain talent. What do you think there from your end, from your view?
Yeah, it is really important, and I have to say one of the points, the Port Authority, the Rotterdam Port Authority, Port of Rotterdam, did see that very good. So they have spent a lot of time in developing talent, attracting talent for the industry, both on the research level with a lot of professors at the university looking at trades, attracting smart people at University of Applied Science as well. So there has been really a good program set up to attract talent. It was a realization within the community. We need to have the people. We are competing with Amsterdam on financials. There's a lack of skilled people in that sense. And I do see that as a payoff. Also in the change, there are different people working in the industry. Also people who do not have I once was the captain seafarer and I got ashore and now I'm doing it. But people with background knowledge on economics, how things are going, digitization, all these kind of things. So I think that is essential. And that is also about how much does it take? It are all small steps, right? And that is where I see like also doing a vodcast, or I've been previously organizing 5 years a hackathon, attracting a lot of tech people to say like these are the challenges we have in ports. Help to think along. Actually, a couple of companies spun off of it in that sense. So and yeah, it was an event with 100 coders, and a couple of companies got out of it. They got into the global play, which is great. Teqplay actually more or less also was originated from that. So for me, it's also about taking the small steps. And if you feel passionate, if you can convince one person that this is great, yeah, let's do it. That's one who joined,
Yeah.
and that is one who's converted. So that for me is like it is hard. Once you got to think big on the one hand, but if you
Well, you
want
have
to
to
change,
think.
you need to make the small steps.
I think they kind of have that tagline for kind of recycling. Was it think global, act local, right? And I think that that's plays really well into it, and kind of talking about what we're trying to do in kind of having these discussions. I think is important because one of the things that I found out, and I kind of didn't mention it really in the beginning about the why, was I've noticed when I was a product manager, I would work with developers, and developers generally they have agnostic skill sets, right? So they could build something for a shipping company, they could build something for a bank, healthcare, a small store. It doesn't matter, right? They have a set of skills, and those could be applied wherever. And it's a really interesting concept. But what was happening is I found that I would talk to my developers and I say, okay, well, we need to think about STS. What's STS? And I was like, well, ship to ship. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't. So I would share a YouTube video. I'd find an appropriate YouTube video that would show the conceptually what I was talking about, and they didn't have any ideas. So what I'm finding is my podcast. A lot of people who are new to the industry will listen to the podcast, not so much to learn about digitalization, but to get a feel for what the topics are talking about. And I have a funny story about this. When I was at Nissan, there was an interesting job that would have been a little bit of a promotion that I kind of raised my hand for. They said, hey, not what we're looking for. I said, okay. They ended up hiring somebody. That person, in part, I mean, this person was very skilled. But in part, learned about Vesson because I had one or two people from Vesson on my podcast, as well as the industry from my podcast.
Yeah,
and I was like, there's a saying that I don't want to repeat on this, but it's something or go blind. And if you're an American, I think you know what that is. I didn't know whether to cry or go home. I think maybe that's a little better. So I just thought it was laugh or cry. I didn't really know. But the point of that is I've had several people come up to me at industry events and say, hey, you're the dinosaur guy. I'm like, yeah, well, okay. Yes. And they're like, oh, I listen to your podcast and it really helps what I do because I'm in marketing and I've never had this experience in shipping before. And it kind of gave me a comfort that I could handle this and be a little bit of knowledge that I'm not completely lost. And I think that, like you said, it's one new listener at a time, right?
Well, fully with you on that one. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like we talked about this before, we could go on for hours and hours. But I'm gonna ask one question here. If you could change somebody's mindset with this, well, what do you think you would change here?
It's so funny. I think I come to the word trust. On one hand, we were talking about the industry being relationship and trust driven. I think that it is on the personal level. On a transactional level, I think there are still a lot of things organized which contractually or whatever are focusing on I do not trust. So if I would be able to change this, I would say like, yes, you need to have a resolution, but maybe we can slightly shift to a different model, which is a bit less based on trust or to outsmart to prevent that outsmarting to take profit from someone. It's like we are in this jointly. But this is where I see this pride in the industry. I see people are really proud of it. And if there is something, everyone will help. Yet on that other level, I would like to shift that level a bit to more the business as usual, because there is also a huge opportunity that will benefit people, the planet, and I also think the joy in work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I from my point of view, I think that AI and technology is not going to come for your job. I do think the mindset is of a broker, charterer, even tugs and pilots, and those jobs will still be there, but it'll look different. The job that I did as a shipbroker when I started in the early 2020s, and if my kids went to it, which I don't think they will, they start, let's say, in 5 years from now, 2030, it's going to be two completely different jobs. There's going to be fundamentally the same, but there's going to be some things that I think that are going to change. And I think as it progresses, it could speed up a little bit. But I think it's a little bit, I don't want to sound this extreme, but I think it's going to be adapt and not die, but adapt or become less relevant quicker. I think that's the biggest, that to me is the biggest thing. And again, it's not to replace your job. Yes, there may be some job losses, but like the bubble that you may squeeze some job losses here, but something else may pop out. There may be a whole new set of skills that are going to be required. And I go back to the relationship side. I think those are never going to go away. Because that, unlike an Uber that just drops you off after going to the train station or something, these are people you do repeat business with, Ships come back to Rotterdam, brokers and charterers and owners work together often, right? So I think that's it. So this has been really interesting. I'd love to ask you what you're reading. I mean, obviously that's how I conclude.
I just finished Annihilation from Michael Houellebecq, which is a French writer. It's kind of the dark side. I really like that one. His stories. I always, when his book comes out, I need to have it. It was translated recently, and the one I'm reading, and that is every day a bit, is The World for Sale, to get a better understanding of what is happening in this world, why are things happening the way they are happening, because there is often a very logical reason behind a lot of things. And if you read these books like The King of Oil, but the World for Sale as well, it's impressive to see what is happening. And I would love to read that book being written in 10 years from now to understand what is happening right now.
Yeah, maybe we could take all of our podcasts and have AI write us a book, which people have suggested. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but yeah. For me, I'm not reading much in the way of books right now. There was a sale recently on Harvard Business Review, and I've always, when I was in university for an MBA, and you're in the library, I used to like to pick it up and just sit for a couple of minutes and read. There was a sale recently, plus you can get it digital for I thought, a relatively good deal. So I am getting that, and I'm trying to read a couple of articles a night. Again, everything from dealing with, customers to strategy to other things. I think it's good to just flex your brain outside of shipping. And even if it's just one thing, talk about like the small step. Well, that's kind of interesting. I could use that in my real life, in my job that pays for my bills. That's kind of cool, right? Yeah. If you're dealing with coworkers, managing up, or dealing with, clients that keep on complaining. There's all sorts of interesting things in there. And, I'll bookmark one or two things. So that's it. Leon, this was fantastic. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, Chris, really, it was a pleasure to have this conversation. I enjoyed the conversation. Great to be on your podcast, and great to have you as a guest.
Yeah, and great to be. And thank you for having me on a guest. It's been a little while since I've been on one, so thank you very much. And looking forward to more of yours, and wishing you all the success with Teqplay as well.
And the Last Dinosaur will continue to drive change in maritime, right?
We hope so. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you. Bye.